in collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
One of Cyprus' most popular musicians and poets is Haji Mike, and since he's just released another album, we devote the entire programme this week to a lengthy chat with him, not just about his music and his poetry, but his thoughts too on other things.
But I don't think we should say people who don't vote are empathetic. I mean, there's a lot of people who just don't know what to vote for, and people are pissed off, you know. So why should I vote something tactically because it's the best of the worst, or it's the least worst of the rest of them, or whatever way you want to see it? There is a need in Cyprus for something completely different politically.
Haji Mike has been making music for many years. He's joining us on this week's programme to tell us about his latest offering. It's called 28. Mike, why is it called 28?
Well, 28 is the years that I've been making music, and I was struggling to come up with a name for this new album. And I posted it on Facebook, I'm making a new album, and I got into sort of like direct dialogue with fans on my page. And there was something like, I don't know, 150 comments or something. So it just kept cropping up, the number. And so I decided to call it 28 with Roman numerals. And it's a reflection of that journey that I've been on since about 1990, really. I actually started early, I was in a couple of bands, but as Haji Mike, solo, I started in 1990 as a recording artist.
It all really started in terms of your fan base in Cyprus with the Vragaman, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one step before that was Stavrula, and a lot of people tend to forget that, because that song was the one that really sort of like put me on the map in Cyprus, and it had a bit of a cult status. I remember DJs at the time telling me that it was being sold for ridiculous prices, like £50 a vinyl and things like that, because someone had come over here with a certain number of promo copies from me, but instead of doing the promo, he actually went and sold them, and he sold them for ridiculous prices, and I only found out about this later. And that song acquired a sort of certain status that enabled me to come over and do live concerts, live events.
Because you were in London at the time, weren't you?
Yeah, I was in London from 1963 to 1993, roughly. And I was living, at the time when I started developing my stuff as Haji Mike, I was living above Trehandiri Music Shop, which is probably the largest, at the time, the largest Greek record music shop in the world. People from Greece would even come there to look for their vinyls, a lot of the artists and stuff like that. And Trehandiri really helped me in the sense of being in the heart of the community, living above the shop, meeting all these people in the shop, and also getting the opinions of the owners of Trehandiri, Agi and Lagi. Sadly, Agi passed away a while ago, but both of them, in different ways, were very difficult people to please. So I'd always go there with my latest single and say, "It's my latest single, play it. Not so sure about the chorus, And this went on for a couple of 12-inch singles, until one day I went in there with this song called Stavrula, and they went, "Yeah, it's all right." And the minute they both said it's all right, getting a "yeah, it's all right" out of Agis Patalis was a major achievement in getting an Oscar award or something in the community. And he actually, at one point, he was outselling anything in the community, including Dalaras. So he used to do this weekly chart, and I was quite proud to see that my song was number one in that chart. Stavrula is just a story, really, of. And both those songs really are roughly where my mindset was at the time, because I'd grown up in the community in London. And although a lot of people see them as quite funny, satirical songs, that I don't think a lot of people listen to the lyrics that much, especially Vragaman, because I remember at the time many different people on radio in Cyprus were saying things like, "You swallowed the radio, why do you talk so fast? Kadapias to radiophone, can't you do it a little bit slower?" Really ignorant stuff. They were just completely shocked that I did this record because they expected, you know, someone to walk in from Jamaica or something. Certain radio stations anyway. So it was kind of like, those two songs are really about things like proxenia, arranged marriages, and they were very dominant things in the community. The way we grew up as young men was completely different from the way our sisters grew up as young women. So that's what those songs are really about, really. But they are a combination of where I was from, with combined with where I was actually at. And that mixture of, you know, the tradition with modernity is something that will always haunt me because it's part of my identity.
Let's talk about the reggae influence, because that was very evident. It's still evident in some of your music, and we'll come to the new one in a minute. But you managed to mix, as you've just said, the Cypriot part of you with the reggae music that you were into, and that's what made it so fresh, I think.
Well, that's I mean, and that's a London thing, really. To understand that a lot of people see this as a Cyprus thing, and that's inevitable because I came back and people liked the song, so they took off. But this could only happen in London, that fusion. And there's so many other examples of that fusion, of that multicultural. It's just a combined thing, and Haringey was very much like that, as a multicultural melting pot. You know, that's where I was living at the time. But it was also where I'd been doing youth work and done a lot of concerts, a lot of DJing. For 10 years previous to 1990 or so, I was very active in the London borough of Haringey.
Let's talk about when you came back to Cyprus and how you then managed to fit into the community here, bring this music here and keep on making music, but then over the years you've changed slightly more towards poetry and a fusion with different types of very often Caribbean style music.
Yeah, I think the poet has always been in me because that's how I started from about the age of 14. I was writing poetry. And even on my first album, there's a track on it called When Cyprus Becomes One, which was actually licensed at the time to a company called Tongue and Groove, which was a small independent music company in London. That song to date is my most commercial track, you know, in terms of commercial exploitation, because it was on that album that at the time probably sold about 20,000 copies worldwide. So it was licensed. So I've always been doing poetry, but over the course of a certain period of time, really, I think there's a couple of albums that I did, probably after my third album, which is called The Story Man, which came out about 2007. After that, a lot of my work went in a sort of dub poetry direction, which again has very Caribbean roots, but is also very British too, because a lot of the dub poets that I was familiar with, Benjamin Zephaniah, Linton Kwesi Johnson, they were all people that I'd seen as a student or when I was growing up in England. Actually met them as well, you know, in different places that I was at and they were at. So it kind of like led me to explore it's a subgenre of reggae, really.
I was going to ask you to, if you will, analyse what dub poetry is.
Dub poetry is, a lot of the time, is dub music is reggae music that is dubbed out. It has a lot of effects in it. It's in many ways a heavier kind of reggae. And dub poetry is often very rhythmic and using the Jamaican patois, the Jamaican dialect or language. And I see a lot of similarities between Jamaican as patois and Cypriot as a form of patois, but also as Gringlish, which is a subgenre of being Cypriot, I guess, which a lot of people totally stereotype and also decontextualize, because Gringlish is a spoken slang that developed wherever there was Greek-speaking people around the world in the diasporic situations. And in Greek, I include Cypriot as well. Just like there is a certain slang that developed parallel as well in Turkish language too, which is very British, Turkish, and all Australia, USA, wherever you've got people that have travelled, taken their language and their roots with them, you find a sort of cross-fertilisation, which is very much what I've done, between where they came from and where they were actually at. So it was a combined thing. So I think Greenglish is a completely misconceived thing in Cyprus that people just take as people spelling badly on Facebook because they can't write Greek. There is something that is a little bit more than that. Essentially, it's a slang, and I guess I'm one of the major supporters of that slang as slang, because I think it's totally misconceived in Cyprus, and I feel very proud of it in a lot of ways. That I remember watching some news report. It was quite a long time ago. Phrixos Savidis, you probably remember him. He was Minister of Health. He was sort of saying something about a football team, probably Apollon, and he used the word unbestefable. Which unbestefable is actually a word that my mentor and great friend Shoga Haji Shagali came up with in his studio in Edmonton when we was recording Vragaman. We was just sitting there one day and he said, unbestefable.
We should explain for people who don't speak Greek that bistevo is I believe, so it's unbelievable in Greek.
Unbelievable, yeah. And it is. I feel quite proud that, a lot of these words end up coming into the daily discourse, in daily language in Cyprus, vernacular language. And it's nothing new, you got people like Belaia have got words in their song like, Osarchis. Osarchis is the sergeant. And that word is something that goes back decades, probably to when my dad was 30 years old or something, when that's how they would talk about an officer in the British Army. So there's a lot of these words in our daily usage. And anybody who thinks language is pure and judges people by the correctness of how they speak, it's a bit like we have to talk the Queen's English in order for it to be considered English. Absolute rubbish, You listen to a lot of British radio stations, you hear all kinds of accents. I've always been fascinated by the diversity of say, like BBC radio, because you got everybody on it. Andy Kershaw, I remember the first time I met him, because I did a few sessions for him back then. I couldn't understand a word the way he was saying his Mancunian accent, and it was like all I understood was, do you want to be on the show? But I couldn't understand the rest of it. But that guy's got a radio show. I think that's fantastic, but you don't have that in Cyprus. In Cyprus, everybody sounds like they come from straight out of Athens, out of a radio station in Athens.
Let's move on from the language side of it, though that's very important, obviously, as a poet, but to the messages that you're trying to get across. Again, across the years, you've put out lots of different messages. You mentioned Cyprus becoming one is one of them. That's a very political message. Mm-hmm. But you've also looked at society in a lot of your stuff, haven't you? And commented, in a sense, on that. How important to you is it that these messages are underlining everything in the music?
I think this has got to do directly with dub poetry, because dub poetry is the voice of the oppressed, really. And I knew what side I was on a long time ago. So the world is like that, I think. There's people with power and people without power. And when you're in a society where consistently there's so many things that go wrong, there's so much corruption, there's so much deceiving, and so many politicians lying and continuously getting elected, I find politics in Cyprus is just so dead end. It's such a... for me, there's nothing to support anymore. You just think, oh, all right. He said he's going to solve it. No, he didn't. He said he's going to solve it. No, he didn't. And we have a succession of presidents that are never going to do anything, And we have a presidential system when we should be having a parliamentary system. There's so much, the economic crisis, Ilios tragedy, Marie, the stock market crash. There's so many things that you could take that, for me, clearly show why people are supposedly apathetic. I don't think people are apathetic. I think people are pissed off,
They just feel they can't make a change.
I don't. I think a lot of people get on their high horse about voting And I do believe that this is something that people have struggled for, and that has to be respected historically. People died to get the vote. But I don't think we should say people who don't vote are empathetic. I mean, there's a lot of people who just don't know what to vote for, and people are pissed off, you know. So why should I vote something tactically because it's the best of the worst, or it's the least worst of the rest of them, or whatever way you want to see it? There is a need in Cyprus for something completely different politically, and that would have to be along the divide of the people who don't want a solution but want partition, and people who want a solution and want a federal solution. And I don't think that is clear with all the parties that we have at the moment. I think a lot of people have been fooling people for decades, you know, fooling you for decades that you're a refugee and you're going to go back home and we're going to have this really long struggle and it's going to take 300 years, but we're going to get there. Absolute rubbish. You know you're never going to get them now. You've known from day one, and Magarios is to blame for this as well, because from day one after 1974, he negotiated something that he didn't really believe in. And we've inherited that solution. And at the same time, we're going to have this makrochronos agonas, you know, this long-term struggle. And it ain't going to, you know, the longer time people fail to understand it, the longer time passes, the worse things get. And we can see it now, where it's clear that quite a lot of people prefer partition. But they don't realise what they're preferring. Because partition will mean you've got this border with Turkey, first of all. It would also mean you can kiss goodbye to everything. So no one's going to get compensated, no refugees are going to go back home. Just what's been the point of all this then for 44 years, you know? Why have people been struggling? Why have people died for this cause, you know? And a lot of people...
But how do you put this in your music? I mean, let's talk about 28. Tell us about some of the songs on the new album. That's difficult
because you can't, obviously, I've got no illusions that my songs are going to change anything. I mean, the only thing that they can change is me. But if people can just think a little bit out of the box a bit more through music and through lyrics, then in some small way maybe I've contributed to something. And it's important to keep struggling, to keep believing in something that is not just the illusion we're being fed.
How far do you think music has come here in Cyprus since you first started out? Because it's a very different scene now.
Oh yeah. I think it's, in many ways, it's developed, you know, in a distinctly Cypriot way, and I think that's a really good thing. And you've got distinctly Cypriot forms of identity in many forms of music, like in hip-hop, world music with bands like Monsieur Dumani, you know. There's something distinct about the music scene in Cyprus. At the same time, though, I don't think anything has changed in terms of the lack of support, you know, from the state and from radio stations in general. There are a few people, obviously, who understand that there is, you know, like independent music, whatever form that might be. So there is a need to support local artists. But I think the kind of support local artists get compared to, say, the huge amounts of money that they've thrown at things like Chinese opera and all these different things that the Ministry of Education support over decades, or the state orchestra, you know, which I think is a good thing to have a state orchestra, but there's no support whatsoever for anything else. And that could be jazz music, could be traditional music, could be rock music. You know, there's no... I guess what I'm trying to say is there's no policy on music. In small states like Cyprus...
What about the fact
that could be seen as a really important part of culture and a really important part of popular culture, and there's no conception of what popular culture means.
But for the artists themselves who are turning out this music, whatever genre it happens to be, they're all struggling. And that's because a lot of the stuff is obviously in Greek or in Cypriot. And therefore, the appeal in terms of making money must be fairly limited. How far is that a problem? I know you've got over it because you've got a worldwide fan base. You sell a lot of things elsewhere, don't you?
I don't think that's the problem. I mean, you look at a group like Monsieur Demani, they've got worldwide appeal as a world music group. And it's not really about it being in English. I think the problem is the infrastructure in Cyprus does not support Cypriot artists. And it doesn't support them in a way that those people can make a living out of it. So I remember talking 25 years ago to Stavros Sideras, who's a really widely respected musician, composer who's done big theatrical, musical works. And he said to me, the worst thing you can be in Cyprus is a musician. You've always got to supplement it with something else. And at the time he was doing a morning radio show on Radio Grodo, driving from Larnaca to do a show like at 7 o'clock in the morning, you know. And I've known that for a very long time, that you cannot live by music alone in Cyprus, which is very different from other countries. And it's not so much about being in the UK or Japan or whatever. In other countries, like Jamaica is a small island, but the support that the state gives to locally produced music is completely different from Cyprus. And that is their biggest export aside from tourism, you know, reggae music. And there's a completely different comprehension about what people are doing musically. So you'll be doing a conference, and you know the minister of culture will be there, but the conference will be about music. You wouldn't get that over here. It would be like they just turn up to all the official la-di-da-di that they do. There's no real support, and this includes everything: copyright, radio stations, television, even copyright collection companies. Complete farce what they do, what they've been doing for decades. It's laughable the amount of money that I received for Vragaman back then. It's got nothing to do with piracy, but everything to do with PRS in Cyprus just not doing it, you know, just not doing their job properly.
And what about the fact that you can now sell stuff online? That must make a big difference.
Definitely.
You use your social media, your Facebook page and so on to inform your fans about what's out there.
Yeah.
And they can buy online, they can download. But you did tell me that in the US, I think,
This year, yeah.
downloads are actually lower than sales of vinyl and CDs, because you've released 28 as a CD.
Yeah, as a CD and a download. I don't think you can totally ignore the download, unless you want to be a Puritan, which some people do. But the internet generally has been a salvation for many musicians around the world, not just in terms of downloads and sharing music and promoting music, but also in terms of actually making music. Download and you know, the whole digital thing is here to stay. So we release things on CD or vinyl, but we also release simultaneously as download. I think the biggest thing about the internet, aside from distribution and a different form and all this, and how you know instantaneous it can be from a promotion point of view, is the fact that it's also a great tool for collaboration. And I've been doing that from about 2006. I think I probably made the first album that was made entirely online in Cyprus and in London. And that was Virtual Oasis, which came out in about 2008 with Dub Caravan. You know, it's a great tool. Even this album, which was done largely in studio, it was the opposite of a lot of the stuff I've been doing recently, which was a lot of online collaboration. There's still a few things that you do using the internet. So I think there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages. But it's definitely enabled a lot of local artists to be seen and heard in ways that they wouldn't be in the past. So if you're making an album that's reggae, and there's no reggae radio stations in Cyprus, then there's about, 500 around the world, internet and land-based, and it's up to you to find them online. So that's the way you promote yourself. So the internet is a tool for getting your voice outside of Cyprus.
It's also a tool, as you said, for collaboration.
Yeah.
Now, you've collaborated with people from all over the world. How do you do that online? You put your bit together and then they add their bit? How does it work?
Well, it's different ways, but a lot of the time it's usually people send me the music and then I record the vocal in my studio and I send it back to them, and they mix it, or they send me the music and I record my vocal and I mix it. Depends really on the collaboration. But I've worked with people in the United States, Japan, Portugal, Greece, UK, Corsica. I'm trying to remember, there's been so much stuff that I've done, Argentina.
And you wouldn't have been able to do that if you were back in the 90s, because you'd have had to travel physically, cost a lot of money.
Yeah, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do that on this album, because I actually recorded one of the tracks in Jamaica. I recorded most of it here with Medred, who did all the music on the album. And then I went to Jamaica for a conference, and I had a very dear friend called Nambo Robinson, who sadly passed away at the beginning of last year. He's an amazing trombone player and an amazing person. And he told me that we can add some horns to it, if you're willing to cover the cost of the studio. And I actually recorded with Nambo and another amazing producer and saxophone player called Dean Fraser at Grafton Studios. And being at that studio in Kingston was just one of the best experiences I've ever had. And seeing these real, geniuses at work, and the way they recorded and the way they communicated. And it added something very special to that track. And it really, this album really is, I know I've been singing the praises of the internet, but this album is my return into the studio as a space. Because I missed that chemistry. I missed that, and I got that mainly through Medred and working in his studio. And it was done over a period of years. I mean, I started recording it in 2012, and it got released this year.
So that's a pretty long running.
Yeah, and it was an on and off project, but during this time a lot of things happened to me, and there was a lot of big changes in my life. Both my parents passed away, and that really knocked me out for a while, Although I was doing quite a few things during that time, and then I was getting diverted with other projects, other releases. And this was always at the back of my mind.
Is that where the 2 tracks on the album come from?
Yeah, there's one for my mum and one for my dad.
That's what I thought.
My dad's one was actually much more difficult to write, because it really hit me. It was the way he died of cancer, and over a fairly long period, like 3 years, and the way he suffered with that disease, that really just took a lot of things out of me. And that track was actually, I had the chorus, but I didn't have anything else. I couldn't write. It was just my mind at the time. And I took all these comments from friends on Facebook. And so all the verses in that song are what people said, which really moved me. And I just wanted to thank people for that support at that time, because it was a very difficult experience. And I had to write one for my mum, because the mothers are the birth of all creation. We won't be here without them. And my mum was a very special person in my life, and she went through she had a very hard life, generally, especially when she was living in Cyprus, and my dad. But my mum's life was much harsher, because her mum died at the age of 12. So by the age of 12, she was out in the fields. She left school. She never completed school.
Mike, we have to wrap it up here. Tell us again where people can find the details on Facebook. Do they just look for Haji Mike?
Yeah, you can find a lot of information about me on my webpage, which is www.hajimike.com. It's all over the internet, iTunes, Google Play, all those other websites, that you can download music from. And locally, the album is available through Magos Record Shop, through the bookshop at the University of Nicosia, various little cafes and cultural places around Nicosia.
Or people can contact you on Facebook.
Reggae shop in Ayia Napa. There's different places all over the island that sell the album. Or people can contact me direct on Facebook.
So that's Haji Mike sharing with us all the details of not only his career to date, but his latest album, 28. And if you look for him on Facebook, he'll put you in the right direction if you want a hard copy of the CD or whether you want to download it. And that about wraps it up for this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. I won't be with you next week. I I'm going on a trip to Asia. I hope there'll be some interesting things for you a fortnight from now. But until we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.